So the first thing we can do is go to a folder where we want to create the project, and then I'm going to create a folder, the project folder, and I'm going to call it task manager, task-manager, and in that folder I want to create a folder for the API. Okay, so we created this API folder here for the API files, but we are going to start with the front end. So let's open a command prompt and navigate to this folder. So cd desktop, cd projects, cd large projects, cd tutorials, cd task manager, and here we can type in ng new front end, which will be the name of the Angular app, and we can add a few flags here. So style is equal to SCSS, so that we can use Sass compilation and use SCSS to write our styles in. And routing is equal to true. Press enter. Our front end folder has been created, as you can see here. So once the front end Angular application has been created, we can now open it up in code. And the first thing I'm going to do is install Boma, which is a front end CSS framework. We are going to be using Boma, which is a free open source CSS framework. So let's install that by typing in npm install Boma --save, and that will install Boma into our project. Okay, so once Boma has been installed, we can go to styles.scss and import the Boma source files. So at import node modules /boma/boma.sass and save that. And we can also create a new file in the source folder called main-styles.scss. This is where we put global styles and change variables and change variable values. Okay, so the first thing we can do here is we can import some Google fonts. Okay, so I'm importing Lato and Nunito, and we can then set some colors. So the main colors we will be using in this app is turquoise and green. So here are some colors that we'll be using, and also light and light green, and dark green as well. There we go. And we can update some of Boma's global variables. Update Boma's global variables. Family sans serif. So the font that will be used. We will set that as Nunito. And we will set the primary color to our green that we set up here. Okay, so we can also set the value of the link color, which will be light green. And here what I want to do is put a background on the HTML element. So type in background, linear gradient, to right top, turquoise, and green. And also we can put in HTML and body. We will set the height to 100%. That's all we need to do there. So now we can go back to styles.scss and import that file. So at import main-styles, that's all we need. And now we can serve the application and see what it looks like. ng serve in the terminal. Okay, we're getting an error. So what happened here? I misspelled turquoise, didn't I? Yep, I misspelled turquoise. Just paste that in there and okay, now it's all working. If we go to localhost 4200, so we now get this nice blue and green gradient background, and we can see that the fonts have been imported successfully because we have these fonts here which are different to the default. Okay, so now we can actually start developing the application. So let's go to app and app component.html. Let's delete this placeholder content here and save. And now there is no placeholder content and we just have this background here. Great. So now what we can do is create a new component for the task view, which will have the list sidebar and the tasks that are inside those lists. So in another terminal, I'm going to type in ng generate component and then pages / task view. What this will do is it will create a subfolder of app called pages and then create the component task view. Let's press enter, and now that's been created, and now we have the pages folder and we have the task view component folder. Okay, so we're going to be developing the main task view in this component here. So now let's set up the routing for this application. So now we have to find the routing file, which is here, the app-routing.module.ts, that file here. And now here we can define some routes. So here's how we define routes. We create an object and we set the path, and the path in this case will just be the route path, which will be the blank string. And we want the component to be the task view component, which we have to import as well. Okay, that's pretty much it. If we save this now, we should get the task view here, and it says task view works, which is great because it means it's loading in the task view. Okay, so now we can go back to task view and start coding here. So let's start implementing the layout now. So here is a UI mockup that I've created, and we want this sort of effect of this box being centered horizontally and vertically. So that is the first thing we're going to do. So I'm going to go to taskview.component.html and I'm going to create a div with class of centered content. And we then want to create a container that will contain these two sections, the sidebar and the tasks list here. Okay, so we're going to create a container for this. So task manager container. So we then want to create the sidebar and the tasks list container. So we can now put in here a sidebar as well as a tasks list container. Okay, save that. And we can now create the titles, which are lists and tasks here. So I'm going to create a title which has text primary, which is a class provided by Boma, and I'll then call this lists, and I'll use a h1 tag for this, not a div. And I'll do the same thing with the list container. So save that, and let's see what we've got here. We do have some text here, but we have to create the styling for these containers. So let's go to taskview.component.scss, and we can now start creating the styles. So for centered content, .centered content, we'll set this as flex, as a flexbox element, and center the content, align item center, and that will center its children elements in the middle. And we'll set the width and height of this. Width will be 100% and the height will be 100%. Okay, let's see what's happened. We now have the text perfectly centered there. So we can now create the task manager container, which will be flex as well. Width and height will be 100%. But we will set the max width to 1000 pixels and the max height to 680 pixels. Save that. we now have this box here, which is like the box in our mockup. It's perfectly centered here, which is great. So now we have to create these styles for the sidebar and the task list container. So if we go to our styles again, we can delete this background here because we won't need it. And we can create the styles for the sidebar, which will be flexbox as well. Flex direction will be column. The width will be 250 pixels. And if we save this now, we can see what's happening here. No, we can't. Yeah, so we can see kind of what's happening here. There is now a separation between this text here and this text here. And we can set the background of this to white to see a little bit clearer. So now we have this sidebar here, which is great. And now what we can do is we can put some padding. So padding, and I'll put 42 pixels of padding here so that we get some nice white space. And there we go. We now have this nice white space like we do in the mockup. Great. And now what we can do is we can set some border radius to round off the corners. So normally we would do border radius and set the border radius to around 8 pixels. Save that to get this. But the problem here is that we don't want these two corners rounded because we want them to connect up nicely with this panel here. So if we can now go and create these styles for the task list container, we can now set this as flexbox as well. And we want this to grow so that it takes up the remaining width that is available. So if we save that now, and also the one thing we can do is we can go to the HTML and we can actually use some BOMA classes. So for sidebar, we can put has background white, and for this container here, we can do has background light. Save that, and we now get this. Now we have a little bit of a problem here, and that's because it's not taking up the full width. So if we go to the task list container, okay, it's because this class was misspelled here, so it's task list container. There we go, and now we get this. And let's set the border radius here as well. The border radius will be 8 pixels. And now we have this. Let's also add the padding. So let's add the 42 pixels of padding. And there we go. We have something similar to the mockup here, but we want the curved edges on the edges of this overall box, not on each individual corner like we do here. We want to remove the border radius on these corners here and these corners here. So the way we can do that is we can set the border radius for each individual corner. So here we can do border dash top dash radius, top left radius, yeah. No, the top right radius we want. The top right radius to be 8 pixels. And we want to do the same thing for the bottom. We now have sharp edges on the left-hand side, and we now have rounded edges on the right-hand side, which is good. And now we have to do the same thing with the sidebar. So in sidebar, we can delete this, and we can type in border dash top dash left radius 8 pixels, and do the same thing for the bottom. Save that. So now we have sharp edges on these sides so that they connect up nicely, and we have rounded edges on the sides, which is great. So now what we want to do is let's just change the styling of these titles here, because we want them in a different font. So if we go to the styles and type in .title, and we can now change the font family to Lato, and we can change the font size to 28 pixels, and we can do a text transform. But these letters are a bit too close, so I'm going to increase the letter spacing to 2 pixels. we now have this, but we can change the font size to something a bit smaller, maybe 24 pixels. That looks a lot better now. 24 pixels headings, there we go. And also one thing I forgot to do is change the text of this heading here. So we can change this to tasks, save that, and I have lists and tasks. So we are quite close to what we have here, but we've made the headings more nicer and we've rounded off these edges, which looks a lot better in my opinion. And now what we can do is we can create this sidebar. So I'm going to create this sidebar by creating a list menu. So .list menu to create a div with class of list menu, and then let's create some list menu items. So I'm going to have an a tag with a class of list menu item. We're not going to have a href, and we're going to have a paragraph tag inside this, which will say, let's say list 1. Save that. Let's see what we've got. So now we have this sort of small little list item here, which is just a normal link, but we want to style this so that it looks more like these sort of list menu items here. So we can now go into the styling and we can create some styles for the list menu and the list menu item. And we can actually nest these because we're using SCSS. The list menu will be a flex box, and flex direction, which will be column, margin top, 15 pixels, and flex grow 1, so that it takes up all the remaining height. Okay, so now in the list menu item, which will be a flex box as well, align the items center, and we can put some padding as well. 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and 15 pixels on the right and left. Save that. So now we have some padding here. Okay, and we can add some border radius. 5 pixels of border radius. We can set the width to 100%. And the color to this hex color code, 5F, 5F, 5F. So it's a darker gray. And we can set some margin bottom of 5 pixels. And we can see that if we create multiple of these list menu items, that they have 5 pixels of spacing in between them. And on hover, the background will change to the light color, which we set in main styles, that color. But to get access to these styles, we have to first import it into this file. So we will do @import main styles.scss. There we go. Save that, and now we have hover effects, these subtle gray background changes. Okay, great. And we can go back down here, and is active. So if this element also has the class is active, the background color will be that background color, and the color of the text will be dark green. Okay, save that. The isActive class will be used on the currently selected list element. So for example, let's set this as the selected element. So save that. And we now have that. So that's how it's going to look when it's selected. Kind of like how we have it in our mockup here. Okay, so we've made quite a lot of progress. We now have this basic layout here, but we still have to add this button here, this add list button here. So, okay, so we want to add that button. So At the end of the sidebar code, we are going to create a button which has a class of button, which is a BOMA class, and is primary, so that the color will be the primary color, and the text will be plus new list. Save that, and now we have this. But we want the text to be white, so we can put has text white. Alright then, so now we can start working on the tasks view here. So what do we need? We need to have a list of task elements. So we can create a task list. Okay, so here we can create task elements. So we can create a div with a class of task, and we can put a paragraph tag inside there with this is something I have to do. Save that, and now we have the text showing up on the side, which isn't correct, and this is because Flexbox defaults to flex direction row when we want to have flex direction column. So let's change that in the styles. Let's go to the task list container and set that to flex direction column. Save that, and now we have the text underneath the title, which is great. And now we can start adding some styles to the task class. So let's first add a background to that. So background we can set to white. There we go, we have a white background there, but we need a lot of padding here. So let's go to, so now let's add some padding, and we'll add 15 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. And there you go, that's much better. And now we can add some border radius of 5 pixels. There you go, that looks a bit better. And we can set the margin top to 10 pixels. And we can see this if we create multiple tasks here. We now have 10 pixels in between each task. And we can see if we don't have any margin top, then it looks pretty bad because they're all stacked on top of each other with no spacing. So if we have the margin top 10 pixels, we now have this, which is great. Okay, so we've got that pretty much done now. The main layout is done. What we can do now is add some hover styles, so that when we hover over these tasks, there is some sort of animation or transition happening here. And what we can do is we can actually put an outline that will show up, which is quite common in these flat style interfaces. So, and hover, we can do a box shadow, which will have no offset and no blur, but there will be a spread value, so 5 pixel spread, and the color will be hashtag EEE. Save that, and now when we hover over it, we now get this gray outline. So now we can put a transition on this. Transition box-shadow 0.2 seconds with an ease. Save that, and we now have this nice animation on hover, which is great. And now what we can do is we want to make these clickable, because what we want to do is we want to set these tasks as complete when we click on them. That's the usage of this interface. So when we click on a task, it will then complete. So the way we can do that is, first of all, we can add a cursor pointer so that it looks clickable. So save that, and we now have this cursor here. And we can then create a click animation. So and active, which is on click. We can do a transform, a scale transform, where it will get to 95% of its original size. Save that, and when we click on it, we now get this click animation. But what would be good is if we had a smooth transition here. So we can change the transition property here, and we can add transform 0.2 seconds ease as well. Save that. And we now get this nice smooth animation when we click on this task, these tasks, which is great. Cool, so now we've got that done. So now what we can do is we can now create the styles for the completed tasks. So these tasks here haven't been completed yet, and they're still tasks to do. But what about the tasks that have been completed? We would like a style where there's a line through them. Alright, so we are now going to create the styles for the complete tasks. So I'm going to add dot complete, and I'm going to set the text decoration to line through. Let's make one of these tasks complete. Save that. And we now have this styling for a complete to do. It has a nice line through it which indicates that it's been complete, which is very nice. But one issue we have here is it's still clickable, which we don't want because completed to-dos don't have an action. So there shouldn't be a hover or a click animation. What we can do is we can go to the task styles. We can create a selector here. Not complete will then have these styles here, which make them clickable. So we still have these styles here on the elements that aren't complete, but we don't have these styles here for the complete tasks, which is great. Okay, so that's good. One thing we could also do is we could actually fade these ones out a little bit so that they don't take up as much attention. So we can change the opacity of this to 80%, for example. And there we go, so that looks a bit better now. Okay, so we've actually completed the basic features of the UI. We have our list menu here with a new list button, and we have our task list here with all the tasks here, which looks pretty good. So now we can actually create the API.